It all began on what seemed like an ordinary school day. The hallways echoed with laughter, lockers slammed, and students rushed to class. But hidden beneath that noise was a storm brewing, a storm that would soon shatter lives. A young black girl, quiet and full of promise, became the target of relentless bullies who saw her kindness as weakness. Their cruelty escalated beyond whispers and taunts until one vicious act left her broken on the cold floor, fighting for her life in a coma. Parents prayed, students whispered, but one figure refused silence, her mother. And when she rose, she didn't just demand justice. She unleashed a reckoning that would shake the entire school to its core. The city where this story unfolds looked ordinary on the surface. A place of morning traffic, hurried footsteps, and teachers trying to keep a dozen restless teenagers under control. Parents sent their children off each day with the hope that the school walls would protect them, nurture them, and help them grow into something greater. But behind those walls, far from the comforting eyes of parents, was a different reality, an invisible battlefield where reputations, insecurities, and cruelty collided daily. Amid this environment was a girl named Aliyah. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the kind to command attention when she walked into the hallway. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her love for reading, her natural intelligence, and the warmth of her smile made her stand out, though not in the way she would have wished. To some, her light was inspiring, but to others, the restless, the bitter, the cruel, it was a target. Aliyah came from a family that valued resilience. Her mother, Denise, worked long hours at the hospital, stitching lives back together as a nurse. She taught her daughter that no matter what storms came, grace was stronger than hate, and Aliyah believed that. She clung to it like a lifeline. But schools are complicated places. They are not only about lessons and grades, they are about power. And in Aliyah's school, power often belonged to those who spoke the loudest, mocked the hardest, and led the cruelest games. The bullying didn't begin with fists. It never does. It started with whispers, the kind that travel faster than fire. Whispers about her hair, about her clothes, about her skin. Cruel jokes that were masked as just fun. Friends she thought she had would laugh along, afraid of being the next target. Each laugh pierced deeper than words could show. Day after day, Aliyah tried to brush it off, to bury herself in books, to keep her head down. But hate doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows bolder when unchecked. The bullies, a group of students who thrived on spectacle, began to escalate. They shoved her books off her desk. They tripped her in the hallway, laughing as she scrambled to gather her papers. They smeared cruel notes on her locker, notes that made even passing students uncomfortable. Teachers noticed, but only slightly. Some whispered to each other that kids would grow out of it. Others looked away, fearing backlash from parents who defended their children's behavior. And so, Aliyah endured. She carried her pain in silence, not wanting to worry her mother. She knew Denise worked double shifts and dragged exhaustion home each night. Why add to her burdens? Instead, Aliyah let the cruelty settle inside her, folding it into invisible scars that no one saw. Yet every scar has its breaking point. The turning moment was almost unnoticeable. A simple Friday afternoon, students buzzing about weekend plans. Aliyah was at her locker, carefully arranging her books, when one of the bullies, emboldened by the crowd, decided that cruelty wasn't enough unless it was a show. They mocked her loudly, pulling at her hair, calling her names that burned like acid. The hallway echoed with laughter as phones recorded. But when Aliyah turned, eyes filled not with anger but with quiet defiance, it sparked something dangerous in them. Bullies thrive on submission, not resistance. That flicker of strength in her eyes made them furious. From that day forward, the cruelty was no longer about amusement. It was about destruction. The tension spread like wildfire. Students whispered about what was coming. Some sympathized but stayed silent. Others egged it on, hungry for drama. The teachers noticed the tension but dismissed it as teenage drama. But to Aliyah, it was suffocating. Each day she entered those doors felt like stepping onto a stage where her pain was entertainment. And yet still she didn't tell her mother. She believed she could handle it. She believed that silence was strength. Denise, meanwhile, began to notice small cracks. The way her daughter hesitated before school, The way her appetite shrank. The way her laughter, once so frequent, had grown rare. Mothers often sense what words cannot explain. But each time Denise asked, Aliyah smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine, Mom." And Denise, overwhelmed with exhaustion, forced herself to believe it. The school painted itself as a safe haven, but safety was an illusion. The administrators focused on test scores, parent donations, and reputations. As long as no scandal reached the outside, they could pretend everything inside was fine. It was this culture of silence, of denial, that allowed cruelty to fester. Aliyah became the perfect storm, an easy target in an environment that thrived on looking away. But what no one could predict was how far the storm would go. What began as whispers had grown into daily humiliation, and what had turned into physical intimidation was now spiraling towards something irreversible. The breaking point came on a day like any other. The sun shone through the classroom windows. Students passed notes and laughed about weekend parties. Aliyah tried to melt into the background, counting the minutes until the final bell. She longed to go home, curl up with her books, and escape the suffocating walls. But fate doesn't wait for convenient moments. It strikes when you least expect it. That afternoon, the bullies circled her in the hallway. Phones were ready, eyes hungry. What was supposed to be just another show was about to cross the line into horror. And though no one knew it then, the consequences would ripple far beyond that hallway. They would ignite a fire that no teacher, no principal, no parent could ever put out. For when cruelty goes unchecked, it doesn't stop at humiliation. It always, inevitably, hungers for destruction, and Aliyah's destruction was about to become the spark for a reckoning that would consume the entire school. The final bell on that fateful afternoon rang with the usual chaos. Students flooding the hallways, laughter echoing, lockers slamming shut in unison. But for Aliyah, every sound felt like a drumbeat of dread. She moved slowly, carefully, trying to slip away unseen, as if invisibility could shield her from the eyes that followed her every step. Yet the bullies never needed to see her to know where she was. They could smell her vulnerability, like wolves circling prey. They had been planning something. That much was obvious in their smirks, their sudden whispers, the way they nudged one another with excitement. Cruelty is rarely spontaneous. It feeds on anticipation, on the thrill of spectacle. And today, they wanted a show. As Aliyah closed her locker, clutching her books tight against her chest, a hand shoved her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling back. She tried to steady herself, but laughter erupted immediately around her. The pack had arrived. The leader of the group, someone who thrived on control, who wore arrogance like armor, stepped closer, eyes gleaming with malice. Behind them, phones lifted into the air, recording every second. This was more than bullying. It was entertainment. The insults came first, sharp and merciless. Words about her skin, her hair, her clothes. Each one meant to slice deeper than the last. Aliyah tried to walk past, but another shoved her back into the circle. The crowd tightened, cheers rising like a twisted chorus. They didn't see her as a person anymore. She was a spectacle, a target, a canvas for their cruelty. When the first shove knocked her books to the floor, pages scattering across the hallway, Aliyah bent to pick them up. But before she could, a foot kicked them further down the hall. The laughter grew louder, vibrating through her chest. Her hands shook as she tried again, but this time, someone pulled her backpack off her shoulder and tossed it aside. The humiliation was unbearable, but it wasn't over. Humiliation was only the appetizer. Violence was the main course. One of the bullies pushed her hard, sending her crashing against the lockers with a metallic bang that echoed through the hall. Her head rattled from the impact. A gasp rippled through some of the onlookers, but no one stepped forward. Fear is a powerful silencer, and the crowd preferred being spectators rather than victims. Aliyah's vision blurred, but she tried to stand tall, tried to push through. That flicker of defiance in her eyes returned, small, fragile, but there. And that defiance was exactly what enraged them further. The leader shoved her again, harder, until she crumpled to the ground. Cheers erupted as if this were a sport. But what came next was no longer a cruel prank or a humiliating shove. It was an assault, a violent, merciless barrage of kicks and punches, fueled not by anger alone but by the intoxicating thrill of control. Each blow landed harder, each laugh louder until Alaya's body lay still. The laughter faltered. Some students lowered their phones, their excitement replaced by unease. Alaya wasn't moving. Her breaths were shallow, her eyes fluttering shut. A silence swept through the hallway that was heavier than any sound before it. Panic trickled in, but too late. Teachers arrived, pushing through the crowd, horrified at the sight of the unconscious girl sprawled across the floor. Screams replaced laughter. Phones quickly vanished into pockets. Students dispersed, afraid of being caught, afraid of being blamed. The bullies stepped back, their faces drained of the satisfaction they'd carried moments earlier. The ambulance came quickly. Alaya's limp body was lifted onto a stretcher, her head supported, her arms dangling lifelessly at her side. Denise was called at the hospital where she worked, her world collapsing the moment she heard her daughter's name paired with the words, "critical condition." She rushed through the emergency doors not as a nurse but as a mother, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. When she saw Alaya, tubes and wires attached, her face bruised, her body unmoving, Denise felt a scream rise inside her chest, so loud it could have shattered walls. But the scream never left her lips. Instead, silence consumed her, a silence filled with rage, grief, and disbelief. The doctors explained, Alaya had slipped into a coma. The trauma to her head was severe. Whether she would wake up was uncertain. Denise gripped her daughter's hand, whispering silent prayers, her tears soaking into the sheets. Around her, the hospital machines beeped indifferently, as if mocking the chaos in her heart. Word spread quickly through the school and the community. Whispers turned into headlines. Black student hospitalized after brutal attack. Social media flooded with fragments of the recording. Edited clips, shaky camera angles, blurred faces. The video became viral overnight, igniting outrage far beyond the school's walls. Some condemned the bullies, others the teachers, others the entire system that had allowed cruelty to grow unchecked. Inside the school, panic brewed. Administrators scrambled to save face. They held emergency meetings, sent carefully worded letters to parents, and stressed that they were investigating the incident thoroughly. But everyone knew the truth. They had ignored the warning signs. They had allowed whispers to grow into taunts, taunts into violence, violence into attempted murder. And now their silence was impossible to hide. The bullies, once so bold, hid in fear. Their parents hired lawyers, prepared excuses, and demanded leniency. They claimed it was just a fight gone too far. They insisted their children were good kids who had made a mistake. But Denise saw through it all. This wasn't a mistake. It was cruelty, nurtured and enabled until it had stolen her daughter's voice, her laughter, her future. The community fractured. Some parents demanded expulsions and arrests. Others defended their children with venom, accusing Alaya of provoking the attack, twisting the narrative to protect their own. The school tried to remain neutral, but neutrality in the face of violence is just another form of betrayal. Through it all, Denise never left her daughter's side. She sat by the hospital bed day and night, her hand gripping Alaya's, her voice whispering stories of strength. She replayed memories of her daughter's childhood, of laughter-filled birthdays, of quiet moments reading together, of dreams Alaya once shared about becoming a writer. Each memory was a knife in her chest, a reminder of what was at stake. Days passed. The school returned to its routine, but unease lingered in every corner. Students whispered in hushed tones. Teachers avoided eye contact in the hallways. Everyone was waiting for the news, for the fallout, for the storm they knew was coming. Denise's silence became her strength. While others spoke, argued, and speculated, she watched. She listened. She collected every piece of information she could find about what had happened. She spoke to sympathetic students, piecing together the truth that administrators wanted to bury. And with each detail, her anger grew, not the wild, explosive anger that fades quickly, but a deep, simmering rage that hardens into resolve. She saw clearly what no one else dared to admit. This wasn't just about her daughter. This was about every student who had ever been silenced, every child who had ever been told to ignore it, every victim who had been sacrificed to protect reputations. This was about a system that had failed, and if no one else would hold it accountable, she would. The community waited for her to collapse under the weight of grief. Instead, she rose, quietly at first, like a shadow moving through the night. But soon, her steps would echo so loudly that the entire school, the entire town would feel them. For Denise was no longer just a mother. She was a storm, and storms do not ask for permission. They destroy everything in their path. And as Alaya lay silent in her hospital bed, the storm gathered strength. The school had unleashed cruelty. The bullies had unleashed violence. But Denise was about to unleash something far more powerful: justice. The halls of the school, once so ordinary, had grown heavy with unease in the weeks after the attack. Students whispered but avoided saying too much. Teachers carried themselves stiffly, fearful of lawsuits, fearful of headlines. The administration tried to put on a mask of normalcy, scheduling assemblies, releasing carefully crafted statements, and insisting that they were reviewing disciplinary actions. But everyone knew the truth. Nothing meaningful had been done. The bullies who had nearly killed Alaya still walked the halls. They laughed less, sure, but they walked free. Their parents had shielded them with wealth and influence, twisting the narrative in ways only privilege allows. The school board, desperate to avoid scandal, hesitated to expel them. After all, expulsion would mean admitting failure, and failure was bad for their image. For Denise, watching this unfold while sitting beside her daughter's hospital bed was torture. She kept her grief contained, silent, unspoken, but inside it burned hotter every day. She listened to administrators dodge questions, to lawyers paint Alaya as the instigator, to whispers in the community that tried to minimize what had happened. And with each lie, each evasion, her fury sharpened into something deliberate. She began to plan. It started small. Denise collected the names of everyone involved. She kept records of emails, messages, and phone calls. She studied the school's policies, their failures, their contradictions. As a nurse, she was methodical, trained to notice details others overlooked. And now she applied that discipline not to healing, but to dismantling. The day of reckoning came on a crisp morning, when the school was buzzing with its usual energy. Students shuffled between classes, laughter bouncing down the halls, unaware of the storm that had finally broken free. Denise arrived not in scrubs but in black, her posture tall, her presence magnetic. She carried no weapon, no threat of violence, only the truth, sharpened into a blade that would cut deeper than anything the school had ever faced. Her entry alone drew stares. Parents weren't supposed to walk in unannounced, but no one dared stop her. Something in her eyes warned them not to try. She headed straight to the auditorium, where an assembly had been scheduled to address recent events. It was meant to be damage control, a way for the administration to pacify parents and students with hollow words. But Denise had other plans. When the principal took the stage, clearing his throat nervously, Denise stepped forward. The murmurs spread instantly. Who was this woman, moving with such certainty, ignoring every rule of order? The principal stammered, trying to stop her, but Denise's voice cut through the auditorium like thunder. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice carried the weight of every sleepless night, every tear shed at her daughter's bedside, every injustice she had witnessed. And the silence that fell over the crowd was absolute. She began with the story, the truth stripped bare. She painted the picture of Alaya, the bullying ignored, the cruelty excused, the teachers who looked away, the administrators who silenced complaints. She described the attack in raw detail, forcing every listener to feel the horror of what had been done. Students squirmed, parents gasped, teachers lowered their eyes. The bullies, seated among their peers, shrank into their chairs. Then came the evidence. Denise revealed the screenshots, the notes, the statements from witnesses. She read aloud fragments of the recording that had gone viral, every word searing into the audience's conscience. She dismantled the excuses one by one, exposing the cowardice and corruption that had allowed violence to grow unchecked. But she didn't stop there. She turned her fury on the administration itself, holding up copies of policies they had failed to enforce, highlighting the dozens of complaints filed over the years that had been quietly buried. She named teachers who had ignored warnings, board members who had prioritized reputation over safety, and parents who had defended cruelty to protect their children. She spoke not with venom but with precision, each word a scalpel cutting through their carefully crafted image. The auditorium shifted from discomfort to outrage. Parents began shouting, demanding answers. Students murmured, some in shame, others in anger. The bullies' parents, once smug in their protection, now looked pale, cornered, exposed. And Denise, standing tall at the center, did not falter. Her speech reached its peak when she turned her gaze to the bullies themselves. She did not name them, but her eyes found them in the crowd and silence fell heavy again. She described the moment her daughter's body was lifted onto a stretcher, limp and broken. She described the machines that now kept Aliyah alive, the uncertainty of whether she would ever wake. And then she said the words that pierced deeper than any threat. "You didn't just break my daughter. You broke this entire school, and I will not stop until every piece of this broken system is exposed, burned, and rebuilt. You may have left her in silence, but I will not be silent. I will make sure every one of you remembers what you did, every single day." The room erupted. Not in laughter, not in whispers, but in chaos. Parents shouted, students cried, teachers tried to regain order, but it was too late. Denise had torn the veil off the school's carefully hidden rot, and there was no going back. Reporters, tipped off beforehand, flooded the auditorium with cameras. Denise had ensured her words wouldn't die in that room. They would spread, carried by every headline, every clip, every angry parent who had witnessed it. And as the principal stammered, trying desperately to regain control, Denise walked off the stage, her head high, her silence louder than any scream. Outside the auditorium, the storm grew. Parents demanded the resignation of administrators. Students rallied, some in support of Aliyah, others simply refusing to be silent anymore. The bullies' faces spread across social media, no longer hidden by blurred videos. Their protection crumbled under the weight of public outrage. Denise had done it, not with fists, not with threats, but with truth sharpened into a weapon. She had destroyed the school, not brick by brick, but reputation by reputation. And in the aftermath, as chaos rippled through the halls, one fact became undeniable. Nothing would ever be the same. Inside her heart, grief still burned, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it fueled her. She had taken the pain they inflicted on her daughter and turned it into power, into justice. The school that had ignored her child's suffering was now drowning under the weight of its own silence, and this was only the beginning, for storms do not end in a single strike. They linger, they reshape the land, they leave scars that remind everyone of their force, and Denise's storm had only just begun. The storm Denise unleashed did not pass quietly. It thundered across the school, the community, and beyond, refusing to fade into the background like so many scandals before it. The morning after her speech, headlines exploded. Mother of coma victim confronts entire. School, systemic failure exposed in viral assembly. Showdown. Silence is violence. Denise Johnson demands justice. Clips of her words circulated across social media. Replayed millions of times. Students shared them with captions of shame and solidarity. Parents who had remained silent found their voices ignited. And those who had once dismissed the attack as kids being kids found themselves cornered, exposed for the enablers they were. For the bullies, life unraveled quickly. What their parents' wealth and lawyers had once shielded them from now became impossible to protect. Their names spread online, their faces plastered on every feed. Universities rescinded scholarships. Sports teams dropped them from rosters. Even their friends began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the cruelty now visible to the world. They had built their power on fear, but now they lived in it, every glance a reminder of what they had done. Some tried to play the victim, insisting the attention was unfair, that they were just kids who made a mistake. But the public had no sympathy. The image of Aliyah lying unconscious in her hospital bed was burned into collective memory. This wasn't a mistake. It was violence, broadcast and cheered, and the consequences would not disappear. The administration fared no better. Parents stormed school board meetings, demanding resignations. Emails and complaints once buried surfaced in the light. Teachers who had turned away were called out. The principal, once so confident in his ability to manage the narrative, resigned under pressure. Several board members followed, their careers stained with the mark of cowardice. The school's reputation, once pristine, lay in ruins. Enrollment dropped as parents pulled their children out, unwilling to trust the same system that had allowed brutality to fester. Lawsuits piled up, some from Denise, others from families emboldened by her courage. The school, once a fortress of authority, was now a crumbling structure, every brick loosened by the truth. And at the center of it all was Denise, who never sought fame, never sought power. All she wanted was justice for her daughter. But justice has a way of expanding, of touching lives far beyond its origin. Denise's stand gave strength to others. Across the country, victims of bullying found her words and shared their own stories. Parents demanded accountability in their own schools. Teachers whispered to one another about their responsibility, no longer able to hide behind excuses. But while the world changed, Denise's world remained anchored to a hospital bed. Alaya still lay in silence, machines beeping steadily at her side. Denise never left her, her hand always gripping her daughter's, her voice always whispering stories of love, resilience, and hope. The outside world saw Denise as a warrior, a storm. But within that room, she was only a mother, aching for her child to open her eyes. Weeks passed. The chaos in the community raged on. But inside the hospital, time moved slowly, marked by the rhythm of machines and the shifting of nurses. Denise grew weary, her body heavy, but her spirit refused to break. She had faced the system and torn it apart. Now she faced the greatest battle of all, whether her daughter would return to her. Then one night, when the world outside was quiet, Alaya's fingers twitched. It was the smallest movement, barely noticeable, but to Denise, it was a miracle. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she called for the nurse, her heart pounding with a hope she had forced herself to bury. The doctors confirmed it. The coma was lifting. The days that followed were filled with fragile progress. Alaya's eyes fluttered open. Her voice was weak but present. She struggled to remember details, to piece together the fragments of what had happened. But she was alive. Against the odds, she had returned. When Denise told her daughter what had transpired, the assembly, the chaos, the changes, Alaya listened in silence. Tears welled in her eyes, not for the bullies, not for the lost months, but for the mother who had carried her voice when she could not. She whispered, with all the strength she had, "You saved me." But Denise shook her head. "No, baby. You saved yourself, and together we saved more than just us." The road to recovery was long. Alaya faced therapy, both physical and emotional. The scars were deep, both on her body and in her soul. But she was not alone. Students who had once been silent now reached out, offering apologies, offering friendship. Parents who had dismissed her now stood in solidarity. And Denise, always at her side, ensured she was never again made invisible. The school, now under new leadership, implemented sweeping changes. Anti-bullying programs were no longer token gestures but real commitments. Teachers were trained to intervene, not ignore. Policies were rewritten to protect the vulnerable, not shield the powerful. The culture shifted, not overnight, but gradually, each change a reminder of the cost of silence. But Denise never let them forget. She spoke at assemblies, at board meetings, at community events, not with bitterness but with clarity. She reminded them that change does not come from silence but from courage. That systems only shift when individuals refuse to accept injustice, that her daughter's suffering would not be in vain. Years later, the story of Alaya's attack and her mother's storm remained a lesson told not just in that school, but across the country. Teachers referenced it in classrooms. Parents whispered it to children. Activists used it as an example of the power of truth. It became a reminder that cruelty thrives in silence, but silence can be shattered by even a single voice. And for Alaya, life was never the same. She carried her scars, but she carried them with strength. She wrote about her experience, her words echoing her mother's fire. Her story spread, inspiring others who had felt powerless. She transformed her pain into purpose, her silence into song. Denise watched her daughter rise, pride swelling in her chest. She had destroyed a school's reputation, yes. She had shaken an entire community. But more importantly, she had reminded her daughter and the world of something that can never be erased: the resilience of love. The bullies faded into obscurity, their names remembered only as warnings. The administrators who failed lost their power. The school rebuilt itself, brick by brick, with Denise's storm forever etched into its foundation, and Alaya, once broken on a hallway floor, now stood tall, living proof that even in the darkest moments, light can rise again. The story closed not with vengeance, but with transformation. Not with bitterness, but with strength. For Denise had not only destroyed a school, she had rebuilt a future, and that future was brighter, louder, and more powerful than the silence that had once tried to consume it.